Well, good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled The Perfect Match: How Partnerships Can Streamline Your Next Clinical Trial. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Castor, who developed the content for this presentation. Castor is a leading provider of decentralized and hybrid clinical trial solutions to democratize research. With the highest rated e-clinical platform for decentralized and hybrid clinical trials, Castor's plug-and-play platform offers rapid deployment at scale, enabling researchers to create a trial in a matter of clicks, with easy enrollment, consent, and real-world data capture. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Simon Claassen has over 15 years of professional experience in the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical food industries, specifically in the fields of clinical operations and quality management. In 2007, Simon co-founded Links to Trials, specializing in patient recruitment and adherence services. Links to Trials was one of the first companies in the pharmaceutical industry to use social media and make patient centricity and patient experience leading in its activities. Next, we have Sandra Tobish, who is a senior clinical trial manager working in the clinical affairs team at Essity and heads the clinical work stream of an innovation project developing a digital solution to manage incontinence. She has extensive experience in clinical research with medical devices, either pre-market or post-market research, and is a member of the German Society of Epidemiology. And Dr. Dirk Arts has over 15 years of experience in medicine, research, and technology. He founded Castor to solve the biggest issues in clinical research: a lack of inclusivity, patient focus, and impact of data. Dr. Dirk Arts believes the key to achieving lasting change in the industry is through scalability and standardization. Now, though, without further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to our moderator for today's event, Silvia Frucci, Product Marketing Manager at Castor. You may begin when you're ready.
Hello, thank you, Ryan, and hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Today, we're going to discuss the partnership between Castor, Link to Trial, and Essity to deliver a great streamlined e-clinical solution. So we're going to be looking at, we're going to be taking our panelists through a series of questions about, we're going to discuss about the Electro Device trial and the study and how this Link to Trial and Essity and Castor have cooperated together. Then we're going to deep dive into the interoperability in device trials and why this matters for the patient and how we can streamline data collection. Finally, we're going to deep dive into the technology and how the technology enables integration of data. And the last consideration are going to be around the enrollment and what means for us going forward. Without further ado, let's ask the first question. Sandra, what are the goals and challenges of this Electro Medical Device trial?
Yeah, so the goals and challenges are really easy to explain while guiding you through the slide. So the Electro study, which was already introduced by Sylvia, the short title is Detectability of the Bladder with an early prototype of a bladder sensor. So short but maybe complex, I will guide you through. So we develop currently a bladder sensor, which is finally used for people suffering from urinary incontinence, but currently we are still in the development. And we had the chance to already start a first initial feasibility study with one of our prototypes. And the challenge then was to run a clinical study with the early prototype. We wanted to run the study in-house, being the sponsor himself, and then during the COVID pandemic. So the challenge was to recruit healthy subjects, decrease number of visits, so face-to-face contacts, but do measurements with our own device in-house, being the sponsor and keeping GDPR issues in mind. So we were not able to get in contact with person identifying information. Keeping this perfect match in mind, we then came up with the cooperation and had online recruitment, virtual enrollment, and in the end, our own measurements with our own device. But maybe that will be discussed further during this webinar today.
And Simon, from the link to trial point of view, how did you enable this trial?
Yeah, so Link to Trials is a patient recruitment service, and we recruit patients mainly online. For some studies, we have offline or the more traditional methods as well, but in this study, we used online methods. As you can see, it's not a very large trial, but it's a very nice example of how the different parties in this particular setup that Sandra just described work together to make it easy for the patients to sign up and go through the process. So taking you through these numbers. What we did as Link to Trials, we started with the online recruitment for the study, and for this study we recruited about 394 subjects. They registered for this particular trial, and Link to Trials performed a pre-selection with both an online questionnaire and we did a phone interview with our medical call team. After this phone selection, we were able to refer 128 subjects to the enrollment site, and we will go into a bit more detail about that in a later stage. And of these 128 subjects, 91 signed the Castor e-consent form, and in the end, 84 were enrolled and completed the study.
So, Dirk, on the light of Simon and Sandra consideration, how Castor fits and enables this trial?
Yeah, so some of our technology pieces were used here in this trial, and I think this is actually a great example of how the entire industry can slowly move towards more modern patient-centric clinical trials. We like to constantly repeat DCT, 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 but in the end, what we're trying to do is a shift from the more traditional paradigm of clinical trials, what is very ECRF and site focused, to a new paradigm that is more patient-centric, that offers more flexibility. And that's not a binary choice. And I think in every webinar, I try to come back to that point. I think what you see here is like, this is by no means a fully siteless trial, right? And not every single component that Castor offers for a quote unquote decentralized trial is used here. But we are using remote identification of subjects or participants. We are using e-consent. And so I think this is an amazing mix of sort of traditional paradigm options for a clinical trial and very modern patient-friendly options for running a clinical trial that also allow for more diversity, or at least we hope for more diversity and inclusivity in a trial, because we are not focused on a very small group of potential trial participants. So I'm extremely happy to see this trial using some of Castor's technology, knowing that maybe for the next trial we can go even more in the direction of the modern paradigm, maybe for example using the ePro app to also follow patients at home. In this case, that wasn't needed, and that's totally fine, because ultimately we shouldn't be using technology for the sake of using technology. We should be choosing the technology to make for the best possible experience for a patient and really also the site in a trial. And I think that's exactly what happened here. So it's great to see how this came together, and to also see how these technology pieces were used successfully in the end.
So on this note, on how the technology pieces fits together, my next question is about interoperability and why is important for patients in modern trial. Simon, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, sure. So as a patient recruitment and adherence company, we talk to a lot of patients, and when we talk to these patients, we hear a lot of, well, basically reasons why they would not want to participate or find it difficult to participate in clinical trials. And one of the most important things, and it all ends up what we call the patient journey. If the patient journey is not okay, then a lot of patients are very reluctant to participate in clinical trials. And what we see also with this partnership between the different companies and also the enrollment side PTNR, is that with this type of interaction, you typically see a lot of new apps or data points that need to be collected, and we wanted to prevent that in this trial. So what we did is, from the first initial moment that the patient or the subject came into contact with us, it was a very nice seamless process. So they signed up with us, they got a call from our call team, and they were automatically transferred to the e-consent system with Castor, and Castor took it further throughout their system lines. So without entering a lot of new data points for the patient. So it was a lot easier for them. And again, we talked to a lot of these patients, and if that patient journey is not optimal, we see a lot of patients deciding not to participate or dropping out during the study. So with this type of partnerships, it really helps to get these patients in and keeping them in.
Thank you. And Sandra, Dirk, what's your point of view on that? Can you corroborate this statement from Simon?
Sure, I definitely agree with Simon. So also for us, it was really important that we find healthy individuals and can smoothly guide them through the system. And as Dirk already said, we used Castor, but maybe not as in a traditional way. So also when it comes to e-consent, we had some issues there because it was not allowed to have e-consent and the signatures digitally, according to the Dutch regulations at that point. So we had also paper-based informed consents, and we had registered mail involved and so on and so forth. And then we feared maybe the patient won't find his or her way through the system and end up at the measurement site, but that was not the case. So they were really happy about the different partners. They were really happy about the process and the different systems they used. And when they showed up at the site, they provided us really good feedback that it was so easy to get enrolled in the study and it was so easy to get recruited. It was really beneficial in the end. So I think this partnership with all partners involved was really beneficial, and that in parallel during COVID. So I think we all made a good job, and it was really helpful to have those systems in place.
Yeah, it was really great to hear and to see this coming together. And I think in general, if we think about interoperability in the industry, right now there's so much added complexity. I think everybody agrees that making trials more patient-centric, and when you have the option to introduce patient comfort or flexibility, that's a great thing to do. But it also often means more complexity, right? In the end, this very traditional site-based study where you just have research nurses filling an eCRF is actually quite straightforward. And so I think we have to really consider the fact that there's not going to be a single vendor to do everything really well, right? As you can see, there's clearly two vendors here already in this trial happily working together. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think interoperability is going to be crucial because we'll be looking, or I think at least the sponsors will be looking for best of breed solutions where ideally they bring together the best of multiple worlds. Now, in reality, that's often not very attractive because interoperability is a problem, and it's not easy to get vendors to work together or to speak the same language. But at Castor, we've always, from the beginning, invested in adopting open standards and also being part of all the international initiatives that try to standardize things like a digital protocol or ways we sort of communicate, like what language do we speak between clinical trial components, right? In medical systems, we have, for example, HL7 FHIR. It's not entirely clear what that should be in the clinical trial world, maybe something CDISC based, but that's often too restrictive. And so I think that's really important that we as an industry continue to invest in speaking one single language with these systems, so we can have open APIs like Castor using a standard language to communicate, so that having a best of breed approach in the end becomes attractive. And right now, I think almost all sponsors are thinking we want fewer vendors, and the more we can get everything on a single platform, the better. And we're doing our best to be a platform that can support a lot of use cases. But in the end, I know we won't be able to support every single use case for every single protocol, because there's just so much diversity and heterogeneity in protocols. And so I think everybody embracing interoperability will be super crucial to really making a transition to this modern paradigm where we see a lot more technology components playing together, because otherwise everybody's just going to be put off by the difficulties of integrating data and getting these things to play together, and they'll just go back to buying the solution that has all the bells and whistles that may be 15 years or 20 years old, but at least they kind of work together, and that's really not what we need right now. So I think it's a very critical point you make, Sylvia.
So let's shift to actual our audience, and we have a poll question for you.
Yes, indeed we do, as it should be appearing on everyone's screen at this time. The poll question that we'd like to hear from you asks, has your organization begun to explore solutions for conducting patient enrollment in a decentralized clinical trial? If you take a moment and select one of the answers in front of you and then click submit, you can participate. Your answer options are simply a yes, no, or an I don't know. Again, the question we're asking is, has your organization begun to explore solutions for conducting patient enrollment in a decentralized clinical trial? We'll give everyone a few seconds to consider their answer as it applies to themselves or their organization. Looks like most of you have submitted an answer, so thank you very much for participating. Let's go ahead and look at your results. We have 61% of you have selected yes, 22% though at I don't know, and then 17% trailing for no. So thank you very much for your participation, and Sylvia, it's back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. That's as expected, I'd say. Sandra and Simon, what's your take on this?
Well, I think it's very good. With a decentralized clinical trial setting, one of the issues is getting your patients in, of course, because you don't have the traditional setting with the hospital with their own patient population. Well, sometimes you still do, but not in all cases. So thinking about solutions for finding your patients or healthy volunteers is of course very vital. Yeah, and yeah, I can't stress that enough. The earlier you think about that in your clinical trial setup, I think the better it is. Finding your patients in your clinical trial is a very important thing, and yeah, should be considered when drafting up the protocol and setting up all the study details. Like we did with this study, Sandra approached us in a very early stage of the setup of this study and the organizational part, and we were happy to to discuss that and think with her on how we created this solution with the partnership of these different companies. So it's good to see that that a lot of these participants do that as well.
I would argue we see a little bit of selection bias here. Well, maybe Sandra, you can.
Yeah, please proceed. Please go ahead.
But I think it's great to see more yeses than nos. But I think there's a certain crowd drawn to these webinars. I think if we would run the survey across all study teams in an unbiased way, I would be surprised if we get this answer. But it's going, it's moving, right? I think that's the most important thing. It's not, I think every 6 months you would sample this, the number would go up. And I think the reason for that is also very natural. There were just a ton of protocols still in motion during the pandemic. There were some scenarios that the FDA allowed for, but I feel it's only now that we're still really starting to go into a phase where we can start to see protocols that have been designed during the pandemic, or studies have been designed during the pandemic and beyond, starting to adopt some of these new principles. And so I expect and also hope a little bit, fingers crossed, that the bulk of trials that are truly incorporating some of these novel methods are still on the horizon, just because there's such a long cycle to getting new trials in the pipeline, designing them, getting them out there, getting them started, etc. So I hope this is a trend we're seeing, and I hope that when we would sample across all study teams, at some point we would also see more yeses and nos, like we see here. Over to Sandra.
So at Essity, we already thought about new ways of recruitment before COVID, but then it was quite difficult because no one really focused on it. However, during COVID, we were forced to find new solutions, and Electro is now dealt as a role model, even if at Essity, as a sponsor, we think about comparable approaches for each and every study. However, what we struggle about with at the moment is, at least in Germany, physicians and clinics are not really used to. And it's really hard to convince them that there are new ways of recruitment, that we can speed up the recruitment, we can offload the work at their end, but they are not willing to. So they only want to support us as a sponsor while recruiting their own patients traditionally, like we did 10 years ago. So I hope also we can change this, and we can then proceed and speed up our timelines.
Yeah, I think that takes a ton of time. I think it's also the regulators. We actually have now seen that the Netherlands is starting to adopt e-signatures. If we want to get specific, right? So we can broadly say e-consent in general, but actually it's the e-signature part of e-consent, which is also still, I think, a discussion point in Germany. But I do think that those changes will also help, right? Because I think it will let people know that, hey, if the regulators are changing their mind on this, then maybe it's something to consider. And otherwise, I think we should just continue to do these webinars and make sure that we get in front of people to show them the power. And honestly, what we also should be doing is publishing more metadata, right? So Sandra, I'm not sure if you have data on this, but did this trial enroll faster than historic trials that had a similar setup? If so, or if in any case, we should publish sort of that type of metadata. And hopefully it's a success story. And if it's not a success story, we should change our approach. But I think that's also critical, important to study the new approach, not just run a study, but also on the meta level, say, hey, this is actually now more efficient and your life is going to be better using this approach.
Definitely, it's definitely a success story. And via Link to Trial support and the support from the enrollment side, we enrolled and recruited more patients than we could measure at the site. So we had to reduce their speed to a manageable level at our end because we had more patients recruited than manageable. And we never conducted a study in really short notice. So that's a really success story also within Essity.
Nice.
That's a super interesting thing you say, Sandra. And on this, I would like then to delve a bit deeper because we're going to be talking about technology. So let's talk about how the technology really helped this streamline this process and make the recruitment faster that you can get through the patients themselves. Simon, I think that's it.
Sorry, your sound was gone at least for me. Yeah, so again, we did the recruitment part and the pre-selection part of this process. What we did, I mean, we've worked with Castor before with some other trials, and the process always is relatively similar because we do the initial steps with the patient recruitment, where patient go to our landing page, they read about the study in more detail, they sign up, and we do the pre-selection. And then the patients with their API, our IT integrated that into our system. So again, it's a very easy process for the patients. They don't have to fill in their data again in some other e-consent app from Castor. It's all transferred automatically. So so that part of the process, again, for the patient, the subjects in this case, was very easy, and for other studies we did with Castor, similar. So the data process really helps getting these patients in and motivated to participate in the trial. And I think that's part of the reason what Sandra said is why we were able to recruit so many patients, because we really thought about, or subjects, healthy volunteers, we really thought about this process early on together with Essity and Sandra, and made sure that the process was easy for the people that wanted to participate to go through, and that really helped.
And Dirk, on this, how Castor managed to be the technology provider to make the record of the patient move across this clinical trial?
Well, ultimately, it's tying APIs together, and more we're actually starting to template this. And so I think because of the phase we're in with these types of trials, everybody's like, oh, yeah, we want to go like left here and then right and then loop back and then go straight again. So there's quite a bit of variation in how people want sort of the subject or the participant. Sorry, I keep saying subject, but I know I shouldn't. The participant to flow through the technology. And I think more and more we're starting to actually distill a couple of scenarios from all those variations. And I think it's very important, again, interoperability is one thing, standardization is another. Ultimately, how many workflows do you need? I mean, obviously, everybody would like to customize things, but I think in the end, it's in the best interest of patients in the end if we standardize so that you can actually deploy these things rapidly and you don't have to experiment and test custom integrations every single time. So right now we're getting to that point, and so I think this workflow is one of the workflows that will be one of the ones that will come standard that will be able to deploy very, very quickly. And in the end, the reason we can do this so well is because everything we build is API first. So these systems can communicate very easily with each other. And it's really, I think the biggest challenge is agreeing with everybody what this workflow looks like. So it's one thing to write it in free text in the protocol. It's another to translate it into actual workflow that an API can support. And I think this has been again a success story. And I think one of the trials that will feed into ultimately a level of standardization of, hey, what are sensible workflows to use here, so that for any protocol, a sponsor can basically choose from a menu of workflows and say, yeah, this is the workflow I want. And then instead of it taking, I think at some other vendors and other DCTs, sometimes it takes months and months to deploy something. We want to get to 2 weeks. It should be as simple as building your eCRFs in old school EDC, at least in the old days. And so that's really where we're trying to go with Castor, that level of standardization and ease of deployment.
And Sandra, what's your take on this concept of standardization and how this workflow fit your needs?
Can you maybe repeat your question, because the audio was a bit leaking?
So, what's your take on what Ernst was talking about standardization and how this workflow fit your need for the clinical trial?
So we needed the standardization for sure, as every study might need standardization. But in this case, for us, it was initially challenging to get all partners involved and to get not only patients through the system, but also data through the system to end up with a proper database. Because when subjects were recruited by Link to Trial, afterwards they were already registered in Castor in the EDC system, and starting from that point on, data was documented at different sites, remotely at the site. And for us, standardization was really crucial because we needed our data on time. So as soon as the study was completed, we needed to some data management and then the analysis, because study timeline was tight, more than tight. And due to this good EDC system, due to the high standardization, we were able to analyze our data and share results within 3 weeks after completion. And that was only possible due to high standardization, good monitoring, and proper database setup.
Right. So last question for this panel discussion is, we're going to go out of technology and go back to high level, discussing how we can see the patient recruitment changing over the next 5 to 10 years. Who wants to take? Sandra, do you want to start?
Sure. So personally, I think we need to work more in the direction of patient recruitment and digital remote patient recruitment. So for Essity, as I said before, we already tried out some solutions, or to at least think about some solutions, but we never tried it out. But during COVID and during this study, we tried it out, and now everyone is eager to proceed to go for remote monitoring, go for remote visits. But as I said before, we struggle a bit with our stakeholders. So we struggle a bit with doctors, nursing homes. So they are not aware of any social media campaigns. They struggle with patient age. And they also struggle with their IT structure at clinics, at least in Germany. That is our experience. when we did the study in-house, being the sponsor, being the one doing the measurements, we were more than eager to test some new approaches. And I think that will be the next steps also for us as a sponsor. However, we need to take track of our stakeholders as well.
And Simon, what can you see from a recruitment provider actually? So what's your point of view on this? How do you see this part evolving?
Yeah, first of all, well, the next 5 or 10 years is long term, but in clinical trials is relatively short, I think. So we will definitely see the first steps of the changes, and we're already seeing that with the DCT trials getting up, but also in a more normal traditional setup of trials, we do see a lot of sponsors and also sites. I think 50% of our clients are actual sites that help ask us to help them recruit their patients, because they know it's faster if they put some more time and effort into that. So I definitely think we will see a lot more focus on patient recruitment and not just waiting until a patient shows up in a hospital and might be able to participate in a trial. So we will definitely see that, and with the DCTs coming up, or not necessarily, and Derek's already said that, I don't think all trials should be fully decentralized, but there are a lot of components that can help making it easier for the patient to participate in a trial. We live in an era where digital tools are or patients and volunteers are definitely very familiar with these type of tools. And I also think it's kind of a misconception that the elderly patients find that difficult. We see a lot of 60, 70, and even 80-year-old patients working with digital tools, especially in the COVID after the COVID era. So with these things coming up, it will be more incorporated to find patients outside of the normal hospital setting, definitely in the next couple of years already. And over the next 5 or 10 years, I see a big shift with collecting data, with more native apps that are used on a daily basis instead of just for a trial. So everything will be a lot easier for patients to participate in clinical trials than it is currently, with a lot of additional visits and a lot of extra burden to participate in a trial. And we see the trend that patients just don't like that anymore. They want to do then as normal as possible and participate in a trial with that accommodates that.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, if I lean all the way to the end of the 10 years, which is not that long indeed, I think there is a future for more patient-owned data, as in patients really taking ownership of their data from a clinical trial, for example, and with that, making sure that they are enrolled in registries that are open to anyone, so that as opposed to us finding patients and participants, they are basically already taking action and saying, look, I would like to be in a trial. Here is some of my data, and I'm going to make it even easier for you to identify me. And I know there's a ton of these registries already, and everybody obviously wants the holy grail, basically, to have millions of patients in a single registry with some basic medical data and to recruit from there. And I think more and more patients will start to take the initiative to extract their data from other places, maybe from a trial they have already been in, and then contribute it to one of those registries. And my ideal future, which is more, and we haven't mentioned the word blockchain once in this whole session, which I think is a great result, but I think in a future where we have sort of more blockchain as technology being out in the open and actually being used by individuals, you can imagine a setup where you have your data in a protected environment, but exposed on a metadata level, so that you can ultimately be identified by almost like a search engine, so that you don't have to contribute your data to some platform with your PII, because obviously your data is useless if you can't be contacted, right? So you have to contribute both your medical data and to an extent your PII, so your identifiable information, to one of those platforms, which is going to be uncomfortable for many. So I think the step after that is using modern technology where you host your own metadata on your own personal, let's say, digital endpoint, and then a search engine can find you. And this sounds a little bit futuristic, but the technology is there. And I think that's ultimately where we should be driving, because I would say that's ultimate sort of patient ownership, where with one click you say, hey, I'm open to being recruited, but I'm not going to push my personal information to some random platform alongside my medical information. But that's probably a little bit further out than 10 years, if I'm being completely honest. But I do think it's an interesting future prospect to think about. That's it from my end, Sylvia.
Yeah, sorry, I had a
I'm sorry. I don't think we can hear you,
connection problem, so I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yes, indeed, we can.
Yeah, sorry, I had a massive connection problem, so I'm scrambled back. So thank you so much for all of the three panelists, and thank you very much to the audience today. I think we can move into the Q&A part.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation. I would like to take a moment now to remind the audience to continue to send their questions or comments using the questions window for this Q&A portion of the webinar, and also take a moment to direct you to the handouts tab within the GoToWebinar control panel, where you'll find some additional documentation related to today's presentation to download for some further reading. Now, I have already received some questions though from the audience, so we'll get ourselves started with those. The very first question that we have, and Sandra, this is actually directed towards yourself. It says, I would like to know, was it difficult to get this study approved by ethics committees regarding GDPR and the new approach where more parties were next to the site team and PI were involved?
That was one of my major concerns in the early beginning, when we had different suppliers involved, when we had different parties involved, and when we come up with a social media campaign, and I thought we will never get that approved. But Simon then already shared some information and supported me already how to convince the ethics committee and how to get rid of all issues regarding GDPR. And as a team, we did a really good job. So we could convince the ethics committee, at least in the Netherlands, to run this study with all different parties involved. And as a side remark, we used paper ICF forms because it was not allowed at that stage, and the ethics committee had no comments at all, and we got this study approved. Not sure if that would be the fact in Germany. We had some other issues here, but at least in the Netherlands, that was not a problem, and I think that was based on all the support we get from different parties and all the information we shared with the ethics committee already.
Excellent, very good. Thank you very much for that answer. The next question we have isn't necessarily directed to anyone, just to the panel as a whole. It would like to know if you can just talk a little bit more about what measures are taken in the e-consent process to ensure a participant is reading the material. Are you able to ask questions and to ensure it is the actual participant doing the e-consent process and not necessarily someone else?
Maybe I can start with this. What we did to ensure that this is the real patient we want to, or the real subject we want to enroll, which was already recruited, we had two different phone calls, so video conferences. One in the beginning, after the pre-screening step was already finalized by Link to Trials, and then they had a video call with the enrollment site. So this is how we called them, and they already checked the ID card already, to ensure that this is really the person we want to enroll. Then they had shared the first information about the study, and when the subject was still interested in the study, they received the ICF via registered mail to their home address. They had to read it, and if they are still interested, they had to sign already on paper and send it back via registered mail to the enrollment site. And they checked once again if the signature on the paper is the same signature as on the ID card, to double check if it's still the same and the right subject to enroll. And they already asked some questions, vice versa, also the patient or the subject. And in the end, then this person was enrolled. But we had an additional issue when it comes to GDPR. When the patient or subject went to the site, they were not able or they were able, but they were not allowed to share any person identifying information. So they should not say, hello, my name is Sandra Robisch, I want to participate in the study. That was not allowed. They only had a subject identification card with the subject ID on it, and that was only shared by the enrollment site. So only those person could then participate and get measured at the site.
Very good, excellent, thank you. I don't suppose anyone else has any of their own ideas to share with the audience, ensuring that the actual patient is the one, or the participant is the one who's reading the material of the e-consent form? I mean, it was very, very well done, Sandra, for that answer. Really, it covers quite a lot. We've got another question here from the audience. They're wondering if you have any stories from patients who have been able to take part in clinical trials thanks to DCTs, and how have expanded enrollment processes really helped them? Any stories to share?
Simon, you must have a story here, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a particular story in itself, but what we do see in a more general sense, and it's kind of a story. I mean, we hear that a lot, that in a more traditional setting, it's often difficult for patients to participate in a clinical trial because of everything that the trial brings, additional visits. We see a lot of patients we do in an Alzheimer type of arena where we need a lot of caregivers participating in those visits. So it's a real burden for those patients. And what we see in a more decentralized trial setting, or at least where some of the visits can be replaced by, for example, online type of meetings, and data can be collected through apps instead of visiting the hospital. We see that it's a lot more inclusive, and also we get a more diverse patient population in. We haven't measured that exactly, so I cannot state it really true, but we get that impression that it's a lot easier for a more variety of patients to sign up or to register for a particular clinical trial and to participate in a clinical trial when there are more visits done at a home, or the apps that are used are they can do it from home, or they have less visits. So that's my general take on this question, that it's we get a lot more patients motivated to participate in clinical trials when we make it a lot easier for them. And I think that's the main advantage for DCTs, at least from a patient recruitment and adherence perspective.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I think if you really think about yourself, and assuming maybe you have, if you're attending this webinar, probably good likely have a part-time or at least part-time or full-time job, and maybe you have kids at home, like I do. Have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and a pretty demanding job. And I also want to exercise, obviously, which I think is very important. So if you add all those things up, you can imagine that the likelihood of me participating in a clinical trial is going to be incredibly low if I have to go to a site at like inconvenient times. And I think if you would ask yourself that question, would you be able to, at a time that is convenient for a site, be able to go there during the week for, and I think the average site visit is like 3 or 4 hours. It's really not like short. Probably not, right? And so I think just by looking at yourself and your friends and people around you in your circle who are raising young families and who are working, I think you can really see that there's actually a high likelihood of it just not working out to participate. And I think that's what we're trying to reduce here, that effect where ultimately trials become more inclusive across multiple axes. Obviously, there's a lot of biases that need to be addressed in basically every single trial. And I think this type of technology can really help alleviate some of that. And so I'm really excited to see us progressing there as an industry.
That's great, thank you very much. So we have someone else wondering, when it comes to digitally filling out report forms and submitting them versus traditional paper methods, do you find this is a key element to the accessibility of trials, and is it really all that much quicker? Maybe, perhaps.
Sorry, can you repeat that question one more time?
Just regarding digitally filling out report forms and submitting them versus traditional paper forms, do you find it's quicker, I suppose, easier to access for patients?
I mean, I think it depends on the exact circumstances. So if we really use eSource, for example, so we use, in this case, ePro wasn't used, but if we would, if we have patients filling out forms directly, instead of the nurse capturing it on paper first and then transcribing it into an EDC, you start to see very serious gains, right? Because you remove that double data entry component where you capture it on paper first and then you recapture it and transcribe it into the system, which introduces errors into the data, which is why we have monitors coming in to monitor the data. So like there's huge savings there. And also just the difference between traditional eCRF-based data capture on sites and direct data capture eSource. There's huge gains to be had. But it kind of depends on exactly what is scenario A compared to what is scenario B. But if you go all the way from traditional paper-based methods that are being transcribed to modern eSource methods, I think the gains are super significant. Data quality will be higher because you don't have the transcription problem. You have the ability to give direct feedback, so you don't have to go back to the original data weeks after the fact, when the data is being reviewed. And obviously, it just saves a lot of human time in doing all these activities. So yeah, I think the list is pretty long in terms of benefits.
Very good.
Sandra, I think you maybe have a more nuanced view on this. I obviously am biased.
No, I definitely agree with you. So we can speed up a lot. So we can increase quality for sure, because it's much easier, as you already mentioned. And also the data management part in the end can be reduced to the essence, because it's really just checking the electronically database and that's it. And then we can start already with the statistical analysis. And we as a sponsor, we always use Castor, we always use EDC systems because we already saw the benefits. However, when it comes to ePro, we sometimes balance between using ePro on a subject level and paper-based documentation, because sometimes it could be beneficial, keeping age in mind, to proceed with paper-based documentation, but we just use it once or only in rare cases, only if really needed. Otherwise, we would always go for electronic database.
Very good. Thank you very much. The next question we have asks, in the clinical trial industry, how important do you think it really is having a proper network of partners for any given payer, such as CRO, sponsor, or technical vendor? I assume it's important to have a good network of partners.
I definitely agree. So it is important to have a good network of partners, and you need not only a good network of partners, you also need good partners in order to proceed. And you need to find the best perfect match, as we discussed today, to proceed with a study, because each study is individual. Each study needs its own solutions. And if you then would have a good partnership and a good network, that really helps. So we now start to create such a network as we did for this Electro study, because we already saw that it's more than beneficial.
Well, just to add to that, I think the sponsor perspective is the most important here. But for us to have good partnerships, as I said, we work with Castor quite a lot, but also with other vendors for other services, and it really helps if the other company and the team behind that company, it really speeds up the process, especially in the startup phase. To get everything up and running is really more efficient if you the company and your partner from previous studies. So yeah, that's definitely important.
Some great insight. Thank you both very much. And really thank you all for all of the answers you've provided here today. However, we have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, though, the team at Castor will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the email addresses that are up on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm also going to send you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view the recording of this event on this page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope you all found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for coming.